Hello everybody, I'm Gwen Campbell-Mindes. Welcome to Books I Should Have Read a Long Time Ago, a day short and a dollar short and a day late, and yeah. I kind of forgot to do this yesterday, and I'm doing it now because, well, it has to get done. Okay, so we're still, we're gonna be in this for a while longer, doing the Arabian Nights. Shockingly, we might be closer to the end than I think. Now, when I went on Gutenberg to download the Arabian Nights, there were 16 books. I assumed that meant that this was a 16-volume work of, various folk tales and so on, as told through the Arabian Nights. Book 10, we have the final tail end of the story that, Shahrazad had left off from, and then we hit the 1001st night in book 10 of 16. And she resolves the story, and King Shahryar decides that Shahrazad has proved that not all women are horrible, and he's going to marry her, and they're going to live happily after, and somehow, in the midst of these 1001 nights during which he was supposed to have spent every single night up all night listening to her tell stories, at some point they managed to have 3 children. I don't even know how that works, but sure. So, we have that happening, and everything resolves, and everybody lives happily ever after, and at that point, we are about 50 pages into this 400-odd page book. And at that point, Sir Richard Burton puts in his so-called terminal essay. The reader who has reached this terminal stage will hardly require my assurance that he has seen the medieval Arab at his best and perhaps at his worst. In glancing over the myriad pictures of this panorama, those who can discern the soul of goodness in things evil will note the true nobility of the Moslem's mind in the Moyen Âge, and the cleanliness of his life from cradle to grave. He has this essay that goes on for pages and pages about how wonderful this series of stories is, and how wonderful Muslims are, and their turn of phrase, and their view of the world, and their way of trusting God is so fantastic. And then he begins to talk about the origin of the Nights. That is, discussing whom do we owe a prose poem which, like the dramatic epos of Herodotus, has no equal. I proceed to lay before the reader a procès-verbal of the sundry pleadings already in court, as concisely as is compatible with intelligibility, furnishing him with references to original authorities, and warning him that a fully detailed account would fill a volume. Yes, but this fills a lot of pages. A lot of pages. He discusses the origins as suggested by other people. He discusses the origins as suggested by him. He talks about who he thinks were actually the best, who has the best theories. He moves on to discussing the Nights in Europe, as in talking about, in effect, how they came to Europe, because of course these were written in Arabic. And, funnily enough, Arabic is not a particularly European language. And so they had to be translated, and he winds up discussing the process having been begun 1704 to 17 by Galland, a Frenchman, continued 1823 by von Hammer, an Austro-German, and finished by Mr. John Payne 1882-84, an Englishman. But we must not forget that it is wholly and solely to the genius of the Gaul that Europe owes the Arabian Nights entertainments. And he discusses Antoine Galland as the first to discover the marvelous fund of stories, and then he insists on saying that, insists on discussing for pages and pages and pages, basically, Monsieur Galland's, his biography. He gives us a biography of Galland because he wants to discuss where this person came from, and why he thinks that this is a really excellent translation, at least into French. That there are some variations that were done bowing to the, sense of what of right and wrong and public morals and so on of the French. And so there are things that he, of course, massaged slightly in his translation, but he still nonetheless thinks that Antoine Galland was fantastic. But we get in this variant of the Nights, we get the biography. Antoine Galland was born in A.D. 1646 of peasant parents, poor and honest, at Royaux, a little bourg in Picardy, some 2 leagues from Montdidier. He was a 7th child, and his mother, left a widow in early life and compelled to earn her livelihood, saw scant chance of educating him. And the kindly assistance of a canon of the cathedral and president of the Collège de Noyon relieved her of her difficulties. And so we have pages and pages and pages of discussion about this. And for the record, Mr. Burton, Sir Richard Burton, he was a polyglot, which you can tell because he insists on having these massive runs of things, mostly in French, but, in German, in Latin, obviously in Latin, of course in Latin. I mean, goodness knows, you can't function without Latin. But, right here, Charles Nodier, a genius in his way. Dès le moment de leur publication, s'était fait qu'il y a sur haute production de l'esprit une vogue populaire, quoiqu'il appartiennent à une littérature peu connue en France, et que ce genre de composition admit ou plutôt exigea de détails, de mœurs, de caractères, de costumes et de localités absolument étrangères à toutes les idées, établies dans nos contes et nos romans, on and on and on. You're just like, this is a thing where if you don't read French at all, you're gonna be hauling out the Google Translate to at least parse out the bulk of this, because he just keeps going. And after discussing the Nights in Europe, the matter and manner of the Nights, social condition is where he decides to start discussing, well, as I here propose to treat the social condition of which the Nights discloses of al-Islam at the earlier period of its development, concerning the position of women and about the pornology of the great saga book. So he talks about the role of women, he talks about Islam itself, he talks about the role of women in Islam, he talks about pederasty, it goes on and on and on. It is amazing. And then, following that, he has these things in the discussion of pederasty, again, dropping into French. Pederasty was réglementé, and adds le goût des pédérastes, quoique moins en vogue que du temps d'Henri III, the French Heliogabalus. Heliogabalus, by the way, for those who want to know, was a Roman emperor who was known for his particularly, I guess for more than most Roman emperors, but a particularly dissolute and morally and ethically bankrupt in sexual fashion court for this particular Roman emperor from around 280, I think, roughly. It's a thing. It keeps going. Sous le règne desquels les hommes se provoquaient mutuellement sous les portiques de Louvre, fait des progrès considérables. It goes on. And then, when he's finished talking about pederasty for way more pages than you would expect, and he has a lot of theories about discussions about that. He has his theory about how there's a layer of the, that it's clearly related to geography because there's particular sectors of the world where this is a thing, and it just goes on. And then, Then we get on the prose, rhyme, and poetry of the Nights, in which he discusses the various, a few observations concerning the saj'a or rhymed prose and the shi'r or measured sentence that is the verse of the Nights. And, he says a measured, he says that, just a few observations, he says. So, on the poetry and prose of the Nights, that starts at page 191 and hasn't yet finished by page 221. Like, it keeps going and going and going, and it's remarkable. It's a fascinating thing. And I have to say that one of the things that I've made note of in the case of this particular Sir Richard Burton translation is, if nobody has ever made an expurgated version of this, which is just his introduction and his footnotes edited down and this closing area, somebody needs to do that, because this is a remarkable intellectual disquisition on a number of things surrounding and connected, occasionally only loosely connected, to the Arabian Nights, just in lengthy, fascinating, erudite discussion. This will not be for everybody, but if you are somebody who can find it fascinating, to listen to anyone discussing, that the former has in composition metrical or unmetrical 3 distinct forms, saj'a, mutawazi, parallel. The most common is when the ending words of sentences agree in measure, assonance, and final letter, in fact are full rhyme. Next is saj'a, mutaraf, the affluent, when the periods, hemistichs, or couplets end in words whose terminal letters correspond, although differing in measure and number. And thirdly, saj'a, muazzana, equilibrium, is applied to the balance which affects words corresponding in measure but differing in final letters. If you find any of this kind of thing interesting, I cannot but recommend this, because it just, this is just so incredible, this work of scholarship that he has slapped on at the end. And there are 6 more books. This is book 10. I am, in fact, deeply fascinated now, because I have reached the end of 1001 Nights. I have read the stories, but it's still going. It's still going. And when you get close to the end, he starts talking about, he throws in some incomplete stories. I don't even know what he's going to put in book 11, but I am so fascinated. So, you know what? If you're somebody who finds intellectual disquisitions on, like, any sort of random crap interesting, I cannot recommend, not the 1001 Nights. 1001 Nights are something you read if you like really, really weird stuff. If you like to read books about people who are told not to do a thing and then do it and then complain that God made them do it because of reasons, you read the stories themselves. But if you want interesting intellectual disquisition, which granted dates back to the 1800s, you should absolutely dig out a copy of this and just skip the stories and just read his occasionally acerbic commentary on all of this other stuff. It is wild. So yeah, that's everything for this week. I will figure out what I'm reading for next week at the last possible second, and we will come back to the Arabian Nights in some number of weeks from now. So yeah, that's everything, and I will see you all next week.